This week, impact on services. Last November, millions of Americans didn't receive SNAP or Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program benefits due to the government shutdown. The government shutdown lasted a record-breaking 43 days, the longest in American history. The effect was devastating, and since then, it hasn't been the only one. 2 more partial shutdowns have occurred so far in 2026. The first, a lapse in funding due to legislation's internal disagreements on immigration policy. The second, a shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security. While the shutdowns in 2026 primarily affected federal workers, the historical 2025 shutdown left a lasting memory for many citizens, with those relying on assistance programs such as SNAP being left days or even weeks without their benefits. Families scrambling to put food on the table surely won't forget it. Which brings up the question, how important are these assistance programs to American citizens? According to the Washington State Office of Financial Management, about 1 in 10 Washington residents ages 0 to 17 live below the poverty line. This number rose dramatically in 2021 and hasn't gone back down since. By 2022, an estimated 186,000 children and teens in Washington State were impoverished. How have Washington State services recovered from the loss in funding, and how is DSHS, the Washington State Department of Social and Health Services, responding as federal financial strife continues? Later, I'll be joined in studio by Assistant Secretary of the Economic Service Administration at DSHS, Carla Reyes. Welcome to the conversation. It's the Rapids Report.
From CR News, this is the Rapids Report with Emmy McGill.
And a good afternoon. I'm Emmy McGill, and thank you for joining us as we explore how recent policy changes and the 2025 government shutdown has affected impoverished families. On October 28th, Governor Bob Ferguson directed nearly $2.2 million per week to provide additional support to Washington's food banks in the wake of the government shutdown. Beginning November 1st, funding for the Federal Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, was halted due to the continued federal shutdown. December SNAP benefits were distributed as usual, but with stricter eligibility requirements. During this time, states were forced to rely on emergency reserves and in some cases delayed or reduced benefits. For many families, this meant uncertainty about when their next meal would come. The Women, Infants, and Children program, known as WIC, faced even greater risk. Because WIC relies on discretionary funding from Congress, some states warned they could run out of support within weeks. These changes were partly driven by new federal legislation, commonly referred to as the Big Beautiful Bill, or BBB Act, which introduced expanded work requirements and reduced benefits for millions of Americans. Together, the shutdown and policy changes created both immediate disruptions and long-term reductions in food assistance, leaving many families still struggling to recover. As a result, millions of Americans are expected to see reduced benefits or lose access to the program altogether over the course of 2026. At the same time, food prices remain elevated compared to pre-pandemic levels, meaning that even those still receiving benefits are able to purchase less with the same amount of assistance. For many households, SNAP benefits that once lasted an entire month are now running out in just a few weeks. Programs like WIC continue to face funding uncertainty as well, requiring short-term fixes rather than long-term solutions. The result is a shift from a short-term crisis during the shutdown to a long-term struggle with both accessibility and affordability. So while many benefits may have resumed, for many families the reality is that safety net itself is beginning to shrink. The historical government shutdown in 2025 was due to Congress not reaching a bipartisan agreement over funding bills, the main conflict over health care subsidies from the Affordable Care Act. During the shutdown, key federal agencies responsible for administering health programs operated with limited staff, leading to processing delays for applications, coverage approvals, and customer support. For many Americans, this resulted in longer wait times to access health services or resolve insurance issues. At the same time, provisions linked to the BBB Act led to changes in subsidy structures, causing premiums to rise for some households, particularly those just above the low-income threshold. For families already dealing with lost or delayed SNAP benefits, these increased health care costs added another level of financial pressure. but many of the challenges Americans are facing today stem from longer-term financial changes in the healthcare system. In 2026, health insurance costs have risen sharply, with some Affordable Care Act marketplace premiums increasing by over 20% on average. A major reason for this is the expiration of pandemic-era federal subsidies at the end of 2025, which previously helped lower monthly costs for millions of Americans. Without those subsidies, many households are now paying significantly more out of pocket, in some cases double what they paid just a year ago. The result? A growing financial strain on families. And those financial pressures don't stop with healthcare. They extend into the classroom as well. In Washington state, schools rely heavily on a combination of state and federal funding. When federal funding becomes uncertain or delayed, districts can face budget shortfalls, forcing cuts to staff, student services, and after-school programs. We've seen these cuts in real time here at River and the Vancouver Public School District, with upcoming program restrictions and staffing cuts across the district. At the same time, as families take on higher healthcare and food costs, schools are seeing increased demand for meal programs, counseling, and basic support services. The result is a system under pressure from both sides, less funding coming in and more needs from the students it serves. For students and their families, the effects of these shutdowns are not just temporary, they can be long-lasting. When SNAP or WIC benefits are delayed, families may have to choose between paying for food, rent, or health care. When healthcare costs rise or coverage is delayed, minor health issues can become major problems. And when schools lose funding or services, students may lose access to meals, mental health support, and academic resources. For many children, school is more than just a place to learn. It's a place where they receive stability, nutrition, and support. When multiple systems, food assistance, healthcare, and education are disrupted at the same time, the impact is compounded. And it's these families, already most vulnerable, who feel the effects the most. So up next, I'll be speaking with Carla Reyes on her perspective and how DSHS is responding to these issues. That's just ahead. Joining me now on set is Assistant Secretary of Economic Service Administration, Carla Reyes. Carla, welcome on set.
Thank you for having me.
I just want to get started with, can you tell us a little about your background and how you came to work at DSHS?
Sure, yeah. When I left college, I began working in accounting. And every month, at the month end, when we were processing billings so that we could have a good end of month, I really did not feel fulfilled. Yes, the work that I was doing, of course I was earning a living and, in the big scheme of things, contributing to the economy in the sense of a business, but I still just felt not quite fulfilled. So I took a little bit of a leap of faith and I took a temporary financial worker job at the Department of Social and Health Services, providing direct supports to help families and individuals access critical safety net services. And I really felt when I made that connection that I made a connection. And that just began my career in public service and serving in the community. And so throughout my career, I started with that direct customer service, and I've had the opportunity to also lead small and large teams, to build brand new programs, to do policy and legislative work, and so that leads me to where I am today as Assistant Secretary at Economic Services Administration.
What are some of the biggest challenges you've seen in working with low-income families in Washington?
I think one of the biggest challenges, there's so much need and never enough support, right? And that said, we can't get bogged down in and give up. I am a pretty persistent person, so it means that we lean in. We look at what resources we do have, and we work to be good stewards of them and to make them go as far as we can. We engage with community. None of the work we do we do alone.
And how do you see the intersection between education and these social services in combating poverty?
We know that the brain science and information about behavioral science shows that children, adults, and families, that when they experience poverty, while they're remarkably resilient, they have these what we call adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. And those adverse childhood experiences, the number of them that they may have as they compound on themselves, impact their ability to have productive, long, healthy lives. And so the intersection of social services is helping identify where those ACEs may be for an individual, for a child, for a family, for an adult, and helping connect them with services that bridge to a different tomorrow in that case. Education, I see as a ladder, right? Helping move to the next thing, the next opportunity that will help them have better economic and future outcomes.
In your work, what successes have you witnessed with families or students who have really improved their situations?
So many opportunities over the years. In our Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, paired with that is what we call the Work First program. And there are a variety of different education and employment and training opportunities. One of those being what we call community jobs. So often, someone may have not had work experience, and or to put that onto their resume to get that employment. These community jobs placements allow for 9 months of a paid, sort of like a paid internship, if you will, but along the way they're gaining those work skills, those abilities, and work to put onto their resumes. So many families that I saw over the years that I was providing direct customer service benefited from programs like that in helping to bridge the gaps, to help them progress to the next phase. And so often they result in ongoing permanent employment and is a starting point. So that would be one example.
From your perspective, what are the most pressing needs for low-income families and for students in Washington State?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost is affordability. I don't think it's a surprise that everything is so much more expensive these days, and it takes such a much bigger part of whatever income an individual or household has. So housing, food, healthcare, just to get to those basic needs met is challenging, and it holds folks back from being able to progress, to deal with progressing and addressing those adverse childhood experiences, for instance. I would say also important to have support of family and community and belonging. Again, none of us journey, hopefully, through this life alone. And we know that when you have a network, a supportive community, that's going to help you both celebrate your successes, but also navigate challenges. And folks who don't have those networks of support struggle to be able to succeed as well. Those are the things I think that are the most challenging.
Can you talk a little bit about how housing instability or homelessness affects students and what services are there available to help them?
Housing instability, if you don't have a home that is stable, there's not a place to retreat to at the end of the day or the beginning of the day. If you don't know where you're going to stay at any given point, it can create gaps in being tied to a particular school, in building a social network, in having access to digital equity, for instance, and tools that are needed for people to learn, for students and adults to learn. So that lack of housing stability just makes it that much harder for them to be able to then turn and focus. Think a little bit of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you're so focused on trying to find stable housing to find those basic needs like food, hard to focus on learning, education, and other things that will help people learn and grow.
What are the key support programs offered by DSHS that low-income families rely on?
We offer, in Economic Services Administration, we offer over 30 different programs. I'll highlight a few that are really important. I think one of the big ones is Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program and Food Assistance Program, which is providing food assistance for nearly 950,000 individuals in Washington State, a third of which are children, a third of which are elderly community members. And 20% of the remaining are working adults. So it is a really important, food is health. Food is sustaining for life. So that is one of the biggest programs that we offer. We have also the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program. I talked about that a little bit earlier. Along with that, that's a cash assistance for low-income families to help them meet basic needs. It's pretty low income. It's not a lot of money, but it helps sort of round out the edges, but also pairs with that Work First program to hopefully help them get skills, abilities, work opportunities. We also, in our administration, provide child support collection services, right? Both parents and also non-custodial parents, maybe kids are with grandma or grandpa or aunt or uncle. Having that additional income coming into the household helps to support that child. And also can help with healthcare coverage. So those are a few key programs that we operate that really help in this space.
And how does DSHS determine eligibility for these programs, and what are some of the barriers to families trying to access them?
Yeah, so generally individuals would apply for assistance. They can do that online. They can come into one of our community service offices. They can call our call center, for instance. When they do that, then we would have an interview with them also, and we would look at the information. We would look at all the programs that they might be eligible for, and then determine that eligibility. They'll need to bring in things or provide information to us for things like income, who's in the household, what are they paying for utilities, for instance, so that we can look at things like deductions to reduce how much income that we count. I think one of the largest challenges in this space is having access to the information. We can often do cross matches, for instance, for income, but in today's world where a lot of folks are working in a gig economy, that gets harder and very complex to calculate. So I think really helping customers be empowered to know what do they need to provide, what do they need to report to remain eligible, if they remain eligible, that is something that can be challenging and take time. And so I would say that's the biggest challenge that we see.
And how effective do you think DSHS is in connecting families with non-governmental community resources like food banks or local nonprofits?
I would say that we have a few different tools. We have a system we call Washington Connection, and it is one way in which somebody could access the application for childcare or other services. And on Washington Connection, they can find access to other programs. I would also say 211 is a very good resource for that. We do a lot of work to partner with our community organizations, for instance, that community jobs that I talked about. A place where somebody might do that is in a local food bank, providing services in the food bank. So we have around the state local planning areas that bring together people across systems. I would say, though, that it's kind of like communication. No matter how much you do, there's still more strengthening to be done. And so we continue to find ways to streamline, to think across. I like to say think horizontally, not just about a singular program, a singular service that someone might need, but to think a little bit more horizontally and connect the dots where we can so that they can engage in services that will help fill those gaps.
Are there any gaps in DSHS's current services that you believe need more attention or funding?
There's always opportunities, and the world is changing. What we need today is not necessarily what we need tomorrow. I'll give an example. We know that when kids are out of school, the nutrition that they may depend on with free and reduced school lunches, if they're not in school in session, do they lose out on some nutrition? So we saw that gap. We worked collaboratively with the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction and the school districts across the state, and we got a waiver from the U.S. Department of Agriculture that allowed us to start a summer food program where we're able to issue electronic benefits transfer benefits to kids for the summer.
How do families transition off of assistant programs when their income increases, and what supports are in place to help them maintain that stability?
Yeah. There's a lot of different programs, and while I talked about wanting to think about programs horizontally, they are all different, and they may be administered from different federal partners, different funding streams. And so the income limits are varied, right? The income limit for medical is different than the income limit for supplemental nutrition assistance. But what we do know is that benefit cliffs are very real for families. And so there are often points where the difference of $1 of income could mean they are eligible or they are not eligible. And that is a challenge that we continue to work with families and communities to say, how can we bridge? Some things that are helpful in that space certainly are earned income tax credits and working families tax credits. Those are tax credits that families can avail themselves of to help minimize the taxes that they are paying when they meet those income thresholds and sort of bridge that cliff. But I don't think anyone has cracked the code on benefits cliffs yet. Certainly something that we continue to strive for every day.
And shifting to a more national level, there's been a lot of discussion about what's being called the Big Beautiful Bill. From your vantage point, how would this bill impact low-income families in Washington, especially those relying on services like SNAP?
Mm-hmm. There's several provisions of this act, particularly related to SNAP. I'll highlight a few of them. One of them being expanding work requirements. Currently in our state, we have a waiver that says, because most counties have a difficult job market, the one county in the state where that's not the case is King County. So we really have a waiver from work participation in most states. That will end, and so we will begin working across the state to help engage folks in work activities, much like we do in the Work First program and in a voluntary program we currently have, which is Basic Food Employment and Training. The challenge with that, as I think about it, is if folks have a work, again, when I talked about thinking horizontally, people aren't just one program. They might be receiving Work First, they might be receiving SNAP, they might be receiving Medicaid. For the first time, Medicaid will actually have work requirements coming down the path. So when we think about these families that are receiving all of these services, one of the things that might really get in the way is administrative burden of all the different reporting. And then people might be removed from programs when they really were eligible for them, not because they're not eligible, but because we weren't able to connect the dots on the sort of documentation. So we are working closely with partners across the state to say, how do we connect these dots and think horizontally about engaging people in work or work-like activities with the goal of keeping eligible people eligible as long as they're receiving. Another change that the bill introduces is it reduces a deduction that we currently are able to provide for households. And so when we stop providing that deduction, then that means their benefit amounts will be reduced, which means less resources to purchase food for their families. There's also some pretty significant changes for our immigrant population. There is a group of folks, typically refugees and asylees into the country, who are here lawfully present and historically have been eligible for federal food benefits. They will no longer be eligible for federal food benefits. In our state, we're one of just a few states that has a state-funded program, so they will transition actually to the state-funded program. So while they'll still be able to receive food benefits, the impact there is really on state budget. Those are a couple of really key changes that we see this bill will bring for Washingtonians.
Yeah, and you mentioned increased work requirements and a shift on to Washington state. And how does that shift the burden onto our state, as analysts suggest?
Yeah, so if it shifts the burden in terms of that administrative documentation. So we'll have to lean in more to get information, to verify how many hours they may be working or participating, and where we wouldn't have done that before. The extent to which people don't, that administrative burden hurdle, if that information doesn't come in, then they may come in and reapply, and then we get the information and then we put them back on. So it just creates some churn that puts a burden on the family, first of all, to lose out on time and benefits. And in the extent to which they need to come talk to us, maybe they're not at work or at that activity that day. And then in terms of the state, it does mean less money going to families for nutrition. The other thing I like to say about food assistance is it really has a huge ripple effect, right? It starts at the plate, the individual or the family who we're providing food assistance for, but it really ripples out. They're going to then use those benefits to purchase food for their family. They're shopping in grocery stores, both small mom and pop grocers and also bigger grocers. To the extent those dollars aren't being spent, and largely in those small mom and pop grocers, they might not be able to continue to operate, exacerbating food deserts, for instance. But rippling out even from there, then a greater draw on food pantries. And then ultimately that food comes from farmers and farmers markets out there. So it really ripples out from that plate through the community. We know that every dollar of food benefits that families receive generates about $1.54 in economic activity. So it really is impactful beyond just the individual.
Do you think there's a way to reform programs like SNAP and Medicaid so that they're more sustainable without making any deep cuts, and what would that look like to you?
I think we're always looking at ways to make sure that we are as efficient as we can be in processing and determining eligibility and issuing benefits. For instance, years and years ago when we moved away from giving people paper food stamps to electronic benefits transfer, that's an efficiency, right? I think in today's day and age, with technology being what it is, there are opportunities here for us to think about how can we be more efficient at processing. Those are things that can help. They do take investments and they do take time.
And finally, if you could send a message to other students like us in high school about the importance of understanding poverty in public policy, what would you say?
I would say your experiences and your voices matter, and that you can influence policy now and into the future. I think that the youth are the leaders of tomorrow, doing things like this. So thank you for having me in here to talk through this and share this message. Gathering information, seeking out mentors. Don't be afraid to ask questions. You really can make the world a better place. I've had a lot of students reaching out to me. I think this is like the 4th or 5th, asking questions as part of the work, understanding how the political process works. And I'm just so pleased to see our youth leaning in to understand and be engaged in the civics of our world. So I would say lean in, ask questions. Gather information. Don't be afraid to ask. We are pleased to be available to provide information and also to learn from you all, right? I mean, you all have different perspectives and probably are better at those technology things day in, day out than I might be. So I think together is I always say the best way to get forward is to do that together. So I would say lean in.
Absolutely.
Work together.
Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
That is our show for this week. I'm Emmy McGill. As always, the conversation continues, because here at CR News, the Rapids Report. Hey Rapids, if you like this video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the CRTV YouTube channel to support content for and by CR students. Thanks for watching.